Hi, my name is Mike and I'm here to read a comic. And today's comic is Superboy, issue number 195, dated June 1973. This is a split issue in that the A story is a solo Superboy story that takes place in Smallville. The more noteworthy story is the Legion of Superheroes saga here. This is the issue that introduced Wildfire into the group, and that was a particularly interesting read. Both these stories are by Cary Bates. Both of them are somewhat nonsensical. The first one is nonsensical in the sense that the villains in this story would be much wiser and richer if they had used their device legally. So it kind of, the first story kind of like underlines just how much, supervillains really don't make much sense, because whatever monetary gains they make by breaking the law, they could make much more money if they used legal channels. So, for example, the villains here are kind of using this ability to create, or their method to create these kind of violent twisters that kind of show up out of nowhere. But at the same time, I mean, if you just patent that technology and sold it to the military, they would make way more money than they do kind of basically robbing banks. The second one is a little more understandable because they were introducing a new hero at the time. And I think they might have been skittish about whether the fan base would accept Wildfire or not. So they kind of created an unlikely scenario where Wildfire is initially rejected by the members of the Legion of Superheroes. Something that would never happen. You would never say no to someone that powerful, but nevertheless it does happen. But then he kind of proves himself at the end of the story, and there's some lingering doubt on whether Wildfire exists, survived or not. And of course the survival was based on the reader reaction to that character, and that was one of the Dave Cockrum issues, and that was a beautifully drawn issue. So I'm going to go into the cover. It's Superboy. And we see Superboy, he's trapped in a twister, and he can't even break out of this violent storm. However, there's a young man here who's blind, and he says that he can stop it, even though he's blind. So there is a little bit of like, hey, blind people are, helpful too. They're humans too. And that may seem like an obvious message to us in 2024, but 1973, people actually had to be reminded of that. So I'm going to go into the comic. The first story is The Rock and Roll Riddle of Smallville. Again, this is kind of a nonsense story. As I had mentioned, the bad guys here would make more money doing this stuff legally or patenting the technology, but nevertheless, they're using it for nefarious purposes. They're creating kind of these thunderballs. And there's a reason why Cary Bates uses the term thunderball specifically. These powerful thunderballs, which also discharge large amounts of lightning, are kind of vexing Superboy here as they're kind of creating all this damage in Smallville. Now, if you're a supervillain or you have a supervillain-like device, I don't know why you'd go to Superboy's hometown to commit crimes. And we see, this is basically kind of a retelling of the cover. We see the blind kid saying that he has the power to control these thunderballs. One thing of note here is the name dropping. In the narration, we see mention of the Rolling Stones, the Grateful Dead, Bob Dylan, and saying that, while, you guys in 73 are listening to that, back in 53, Superboy, he was listening to Elvis Presley, Frankie Avalon, and Pat Boone. So they're kind kind of creating kind of this pop music connection here. I guess this was still DC trying to be relevant to the kids back then. Okay, we'll take a look at the creative team. The art is by Bob Brown and Murphy Anderson. These are two longtime Superman, Superboy artists. I think this is toward the end of Bob Brown's tenure at DC. I think what happened, he was regarded as kind of a little old-fashioned in terms of his artwork. And he was let go by DC. Oddly enough, Marvel picked him up, and I think he kind of worked on some issues of the Defenders. He even worked on an issue of the X-Men that was kind of a fill-in issue. And sadly, he passed away, I think in 1977. I believe he had cancer. He was one of the guys who could not adapt and change his style. And when they would try to convince him to do so, they would show him, comics drawn by Jim Starlin and whatnot. And they said, "Can you draw more like this?" And Bob kind of didn't understand what they were going for. It was different with Jim Mooney. Jim Mooney was let go by DC around this time because his artwork was considered old-fashioned, but he sort of changed when he went into Marvel. A lot of the stuff he did was still recognizable, particularly the faces, but Jim Mooney sort of got what Marvel wanted from him, and he did do some nice Spider-Mans. So it's kind of a tale of two artists. I think Murphy Anderson never left DC. And Cary Bates, there's some news about Cary Bates in this story. So anyway, it turns out there's a baseball game going on. There's a fly ball that's coming down. And there's a young man in a suit and dark glasses, and he's walking through the field. So as this game is going on, apparently they allow pedestrian traffic to go on. One of the outfielders, he calls out to the young man, saying, "Can you catch that ball for me?" Which I don't think baseball does not work that way. If it doesn't count as an out, it's not like any pedestrian can come on field and and just do it for the player there. So anyway, the ball hits the kid in the chest. The outfielder is very angry about this for some odd reason, and he says, "Listen, the ball came right at you. What are you, blind or something?" And the young kid says, "Yeah, I am." And the outfielder, he does feel bad about this because he didn't know, and he's apologetic. And however, the blind kid's kind of used to this. He kind of feels a little sorry for himself, and he's feeling, listen, he's just kind of a useless guy, and in a world that has little use for sightless people, as he thinks to himself. Anyway, we go on, and they're kind of focusing on loners. So this blind kid's a loner in school. And there's another loner in Smallville High School, and that's Clark Kent. Clark Kent is kind of the nerdy guy who can't fit in. He wears a bow tie, so he doesn't even wear a regular tie. And he kind of has this old man sweater. He's 17, but he kind of looks like Mr. Whipple from Sesame Street. So anyway, it turns out the hula hoop is a new fad at the time. So the girls here are having some fun. The guys here are having fun watching the girls. So everything's kind of normal. However, one of the girls throws the hula hoop to Clark, who's in his civilian clothing, and they're kind of saying, "Listen, Clark, why don't you give this a try?" Clark is kind of caught by surprise, but he's saying, "This looks pretty harmless. I'll just do a few gyrations. Maybe I'll fit in a little better with the kids." But it turns out that he does it too hard. He risked kind of like revealing himself as Superboy, because he does the hula hoop so vigorously that it actually jettisons into the air. And Clark realizes that he made a big mistake here, because this could very well reveal that he's Superboy. However, Clark uses his super breath to sort of create the illusion that there was a freak dust storm that showed up. And this is something that comes up in the story. So the kids are kind of like, they're kind of like, the shiny object kids. The excuse that it was a freak dust storm, the kids believe it, and they start chasing after the hula hoop. However, they do note that Clark is kind of a downer, and he kind of ruined their fun again, even though he didn't do so directly. None of them are surprised that, leave it to Clark to kind of ruin the mood here. So they're kind of establishing that, Smallville High School kind of has these two loner losers here. Although one of them obviously is kind of a facade. So anyway, it turns out the two losers are friends. And the blind kid, he has kind of a transistor radio. And that was pretty much all that transistors could power. Marvel gave the impression that transistors can power up this amazing armor suit. And in reality, they could barely power a small portable radio. But nevertheless, they're listening to the music. It turns out there's a big hit on the radio at the time called Bad Time Baby. And it turns out that as this song is being played, there's an immediate hurricane that just comes out of nowhere. And it seems like a pretty powerful twister, because even Clark here is struggling to deal with this. Now, Clark here, he grabs his blind friend, and he kind of like ushers him to safety, because they were near a park, so there's a few bushes. And this is a trope that you would often see in Superman or Superboy comics, where Superman reveals himself, but he does it in front of a blind person, so the blind person can't see him. This has been done a number of times. There was one issue of Superman that I had done a walkthrough where he just clowns some blind kids. At least Superboy here, he's not being mean here. But nevertheless, his blind friend is concerned about Clark, because he's saying, listen, Clark's a bigger loser than me, so just be careful. Clark says he's going to go for help, but he actually is the help, because he goes into action as Superboy. And Superboy encounters what he calls a thunderball, which is sort of this very cloudy ball that there's a great deal of lightning coming out of, that there's lightning discharge coming out of, and it's causing these huge kind of twister effects. So the town of Smallville, at least in this isolated area with the thunderball, are going through a great deal of changes. Again, after this story, you'll know why thunderball, that particular word, was used to describe this. So anyway, Superboy, he's protecting public property because there's a large tree heading for the kind of the high school. So Superboy wants to make sure that all those kids, they have no excuse not to be truant the next day. So even then, Clark's ruining their fun, because this tree hits the building, maybe they're closed for a few days, and they get a few school days. Like Clark's like saying, no, you're not going to have that. So what Superboy does, he uses his super cape. He ties the two ends to some lampposts, and he creates kind of like he goes to two other lampposts that are adjacent to it, and he kind of he basically entraps the thunderball. So the thunderball is kind of stuck under his cape. Superboy's pointing out that this thunderball is very powerful, almost as destructive as an atom bomb. So Superboy knows he kind of has the tiger by the tail here, and he doesn't know whether his cape will give or whether the thunderball will give. Superboy, he's checking out the action. Then immediately the thunderball fades. It goes away. We have some of the citizens. They're obviously concerned about the damage. Superboy here, he kind of pushes his weight around, tells them, "Go back to your homes. I'll be back later to repair everything." So Superboy, he has that authoritarian streak. He's kind of ordering the citizens of Smallville around. He's kind of taking away some union work, some union labor. So yeah, he's kind of like a little bit of a spoil sport. One thing I did notice is that both Brown and Murphy, they draw Superboy a little short here. So he kind of looks like he's closer to 5'4" than anything else. So it's kind of like a nice little thing. They make sure, yeah, he looks like a boy. So then what happens, Superboy, he goes back to his friend. I should say that his friend, his name is Don Blake. Kind of like the Thor identity. I don't know whether there was a trademark on Don Blake or not. So anyway, it turns out that his friend, Don Blake, he still has his radio. And it turned out that the song that they were listening to, Bad Time Baby, had just finished. And this kind of works itself into the plot, is that it's when that song is playing that the Thunderball appears, and when the song is over, it disappears. And obviously they're using the radio here to kind of broadcast this song. And they make a connection between the two later on. Clark is giving a wrap-up of what he did as Superman, saying, hey, I was there, I saw it. His friend, Don Blake, is admonishing him that, you shouldn't be such a pussy. You shouldn't be such a pansy and just run and panic all the time. Show some balls here. So, even when the blind kid, makes fun of you, you're doing a good job being a wimp. So anyway, it's next day in school, which, Superboy made sure that these students are going to be there. And they're listening to the radio. It looks like they're dancing in the gym. Kind of looks like they're having some fun here, so I'm not going to say anything bad. It turns out that Don, Clark's friend, he has a hobby. He scientifically, he has some scientific talent here. And what he's doing is he's attempting to turn his eyeglasses, the sunglasses that he wears, into sort of a sonar device, similar to what Daredevil has with his sonar, his kind of I don't know what his powers were called, because I didn't read that many Daredevils. His kind of sonar powers, or his radar powers, I should say. So he's trying to do that. I guess there's a little bit of a callback here, using the name Don Blake, and the whole blind thing and the sonar powers. So anyway, as his friend is kind of fiddling around with his device here, we go back to Clark. He's back at the gym. He kind of breaks away from the other kids. And at this time, Clark's interest in girls was kind of a little iffy here. He would kind of date Lana Lang a little bit, but whenever she sort of wanted to elevate the romance, and there were a couple of times where she kind of made it clear that she likes Clark and not really Superboy, he would kind of just get a little weak-kneed. They want to keep the DC universe as sexless as possible. So anyway, speaking of sex, as Clark is changing in the janitor's closet, which sort of has an opaque glass window, one of the teachers notices that someone is undressing in there, and she wants to check it out. She wants to see what this student is doing. She wants to see whether this guy is cute, and maybe she can join in on the action here. However, when the teacher opens the janitor's closet, the room is empty. So it looks like Clark, as he was changing into Superboy, he got out of the closet just in time. And we're back to the gym where the dancing is continuing. Everyone's having fun. And suddenly the song Bad Time Baby is playing on the radio again. And the kids really enjoy it. And they really enjoy listening to this song. And it turns out that this particular radio station is the only one playing it. However, one of the kids says, listen, change to the news station because there's a bulletin coming over. And it turns out there's some type of bank robbery in progress. So this is sort of the device where the song is still playing, but the kids here, they just changed the station. So this is sort of how Cary kind of like can impart these two things. Kind of the what you would call it, the expository dialogue that's needed to carry the story along, but at the same time being true to the story that the song is going on. So anyway, the song's going on. Superboy, he heads toward the bank, so he knows that this bank robbery that the kids are hearing a bulletin about is in progress. Superboy flies. He runs into the bank robbers here. However, there's a huge explosion coming out of the bank. And it turns out that the Thunderball that Superboy had encountered earlier has materialized inside the bank. And before I go back to the story, take a look at this one ad. It's for bodybuilding. And the only reason I want to mention it is that I have such strong memories of buying comic books that had this ad. I had no interest whatsoever in actually working out, but this ad always kind of caught my eye. So anyway, we go back to Don, and he's working on his sunglasses to sort of see whether he can create this kind of sonar sensor that he can use to travel around Smallville. Because currently he doesn't have a seeing eye dog, and he doesn't have a cane, so he kind of uses memorization. He memorizes how many steps and how many turns he has to make to the various buildings. So he wants to sort of make himself more independent by at least having this sonar device where he can sort of navigate around town a lot easier, similar to like Daredevil. But it turns out that the device that he created is also an electronic receiver. So he's able to capture radio signals. And he captures one radio signal that's going on, and it's related to the robberies at the bank, or the robbery at the bank. So he's kind of hearing this right now. And at this point, the dialogue it's in mid conversation, so it's kind of like it's not that meaningful to us directly as a reader, but it kind of fills in some of the blanks for the character here. So anyway, we go back to Superboy. He's in the bank. Some of the bank employees have been knocked unconscious by the Thunderball here. Superboy figures out that he only has a few minutes before the air pressure builds up and the entire building will collapse, which won't affect him, but it will affect these three employees. So then Superboy, he saves them by using the most inconvenient methods ever. First of all, he immediately throws them out of the bank. So they're currently in flight at this moment. And then he uses a convertible to catch them. And I mean, on one hand, I guess he saved their lives, but on the other hand, he gave them a lifetime of back and neck pain. But nevertheless, Superboy, he's proud of himself. He had seen ads for this car, and he says that this car has the softest ride, and he figures, yeah, it's good enough to capture these people here. They're minimum wage employees anyway. Superboy notes that the Thunderball has suddenly disappeared. And then we go back to Don Blake, and suddenly his electronic devices aren't picking up those radio waves. So the conversation that he was listening to has stopped. But he has an idea, and he turns on his portable radio. And again, the song "Bad Time Baby" had just ended, and the DJ is kind of talking up the song at this point. And it looks like Don Blake has kind of made a connection here. And he notices a few things. This is a lot of plot convenience. One, that this is the only station that's playing this song. And the thing is, every time the song is on, that's when the thunderballs appear. And when the song is over, the thunderballs disappear. So that's the connection that he's making. He also remembered that when he was receiving those radio transmissions, that he recognized the voice of the DJ. So my guess is that, in between the songs, there was some type of conversation going on, picked up by some electronic device, which was then picked up by Don's electronic device. Don is thinking that he should contact the police, but he holds off on that, he wants to deal with this himself. So this is a pride thing, because he wants to prove to himself, he wants to prove to those around him that people who are blind aren't helpless. Superboy and the chief of police, they don't understand these kind of freak occurrences. They do know that during these freak occurrences, there were bank robberies. Not the chase glitch, but nevertheless there were bank robberies, so there's kind of like that connection, but they don't know what else. And then we go to the radio station. And it turns out that Don, the blind kid, was snooping around. I'm not quite sure what he was looking for or how he was looking for, but nevertheless, he was captured by the villains here. And it turns out that basically they're kind of retelling what's going on here. And it turns out that in the recording of Bad Time Baby, there are certain frequencies in there that when they're broadcast, and they're broadcast at a specific point, they will create that thunderball effect. And it turns out that the radio station has they have an antenna that they broadcast from, and it's portable and it's directional, so they can point the antenna at the bank. So when the song is played and the frequencies are hit, the thunderball will appear at wherever they pointed, and in these cases, they're pointing it at the bank. So they're kind of just going through a bunch of so they're just going through some expository dialogue, just kind of wrapping up the plot. They want to murk Don here because leave no witnesses, but as this kind of Al Capone-like guy attempts to take care of Don, Superboy bursts into the building. I like these two panels here. You can really see how small Superboy is. He looks like he's like 5'2" here in this one drawing. But nevertheless, they do a good job of making sure that Superboy is a boy. So anyway, it turns out what happened here was that these criminals figured out this way of creating these thunderballs. They incorporated it into this song. Then the owner or the DJ of this record station, he's a gambler who's in debt to them. So the gangsters were basically using the DJ, so he would play the song and sort of get out from under their gambling debts. So he was sort of like an unwilling co-conspirator to what these guys were doing. Again, this is where it makes no sense. I mean, if you created this type of technology, you would make more money by patenting it and selling it to like the military or one of the secret services. And it turns out that there are a couple of henchmen hanging around. So when they broke into the radio station, Superboy, he was in the DJ booth, but it looks like there's a couple of henchmen outside. They reveal themselves. Superboy captures them pretty quickly. he gives them both a nasty concussion, along with kind of a forced kiss here. Superboy destroys the record. Apparently, I guess this was the only copy of the record, Bad Time Baby. And again, I should add that Bad Time Baby was popular with the kids. So not only would they have made money from this technology if they had used it legally, they would have a hit record on their hands. They would be swimming in money. Why are they robbing banks? So anyway, we've got, before I go back to the story, take a look at this ad for the music club. Yeah, there's a lot of great music I would have been listening to at this time. Bobby Sherman's greatest hits, The Partridge Family, Alice Cooper, Roberta Flack, Eric Clapton, Bread, Donny Osmond. Oh my God, the classics. And it looks like what they're offering is any 15 for only $1.97. But the thing is that after you joined, you were legally obligated to buy like 11 more records at premium prices. And believe me, they would soak you with those premium prices. And anyway, go back to the conclusion of the story. At some point, there was Don had developed a miniature transmitter that somehow Superboy became in possession with, and it was actually Don who had the transmitter. So he turned on the transmitter, and it kind of created a frequency that Superboy was able to follow, kind of like what Lex Luthor did in Superman 1. So that's how Superboy knew where Don was at the radio station, how he was able to save the day. Don has a great deal of pride now that he largely broke this case. Superboy was there just to do the physical wrap up, and Don saying this, it's a new day for him, that he realizes he's no longer handicapped, and that he's going to walk with some pride. Superboy is very happy that Don has this confidence, and that he's going to have lots of friends, and he's going to be no longer a loner. And Don just kind of dumps on Clark Kent, saying, "I wish I could say the same for that loser Clark Kent." And that's the end of the story. Yeah, kind of a pedestrian story, if you ask me. Okay, so we see an in-house ad for the Shadow. Shadow's a comic I never really cared about, though it was beautifully drawn. And also Plop is coming out soon. Plop was like DC's attempt to kind of compete with Mad Magazine. Okay, before I go to the Legion story, I'm going to take a look at the letters page. And we have an editorial note. And it turns out that Cary Bates was selling a James Bond treatment, or an idea for a James Bond movie to a British. They name it as a British movie company. So basically, Cary was coming up with an idea for the next Bond film, and the plan was that if the producers accepted his idea, Cary would be teaming up with Ronald Dahl, who is the famous children's writer, and they would be working on a script for an upcoming James Bond film. Now, the two things I found interesting, one is that they use British Movie Company. So the thing is, I don't know whether this was the official producers of the James Bond film, because there was kind of a unique legal issue involving James Bond and Thunderball. Basically, it went down like this, was that an Irish movie producer was interested in bringing James Bond to the big screen in the late 50s. and he had contacted Ian Fleming, who was the creator of the James Bond series. I think Ian Fleming was kind of living in the Bahamas at the time. And the two went to work along with the screenwriter, and I think they had spent 3 months together. And they couldn't come up with a real cohesive movie treatment. So the three kind of gave up on the project after 3 months of work. But the thing is that Ian Fleming, I guess he liked enough of the ideas that were coming up from these two guys. And he wrote the book Thunderball. And the thing is that this movie producer and the screenwriter, they were livid when they saw Thunderball on bookshelves, because Ian Fleming basically plagiarized these guys, because he didn't give them any credit, but he was clearly using their ideas. And there was a lawsuit. And it turned out that the lawsuit was so stressful on Ian Fleming that he had a massive heart attack and died. But when the judgment came in, the courts had found that Ian Fleming did plagiarize these guys, and that these guys had the rights to Thunderball. So they didn't have the rights to James Bond per se. They had the rights to James Bond to do a Thunderball movie. And I'm kind of thinking those are the guys Cary was talking to, and not, say, the official James Bond guys. Now, by the time this judgment came out, there were already 2 James Bond films with Sean Connery. So he was already established as James Bond. And what had happened was this Irish producer and the official producer of the James Bond films, they worked out an arrangement where they would co-produce Thunderball together. And that was a huge success. But the thing is that this one movie company, while they had the rights to Thunderball, they also had the rights to a sequel to Thunderball. And they exercised this in 1983 with, I think, what's the name of the film? You Only Live Twice. But remember in the early 80s, 83 I think, there was a Sean Connery James Bond film. That was officially a remake or a sequel to Thunderball. So that's why it's not really officially regarded as James Bond canon. Sorry for that long tangent. So anyway, Cary was looking to break into the movie business. He actually does have some movie credits under his name. I don't think he's done anything great. Cary Bates is one of these guys. He has a long resume, but the impact just wasn't quite there. I don't think anyone says, this great story written by Cary Bates. But they're mentioning that he won't be writing Superboy for a while. I think that lasted 2 issues. I think he was back writing them at 197. But these are the 2 issues he had finished before talking to the movie guys. We talk about some of the letters. One of the letters is pretty interesting here. It's actually not about Superboy per se. It was about how the rodeo was portrayed in a Superboy story that came out earlier, issue number 192. And it turns out that the story painted the rodeo in a very negative light. And this one reader was absolutely livid. And she is defending the practices that go on in the rodeo. Apparently there was one part where a calf was lassoed, and Ma Kent was treating it like, this was just some horrible, brutal act of blood sport. So anyway, the editors, they make it clear they don't want to get into this fight. They don't give a shit about the rodeos, and they're basically calling her out because she's saying, listen, when those calves are roped and they're dragged to the ground, it doesn't hurt them. It really doesn't hurt them. And the editors are calling her out on that. Next one is kind of like a mistake they might have made in Superman 182. This is when young Clark Kent and young Bruce Wayne, they kind of like let each other be known that their secret identities. So this is sort of like the story makes it clear this is the first time the two shared their identities, and the writer's pointing out that that can't be because of what you had done in World's Finest issue number 179. And the other editors admit that he was right, but they're not going to get anything out of it. One other fan says that he wants more new Legion stories, which I don't blame him, because the Dave Cockrum stuff was excellent. But he doesn't want the reprints. He doesn't want a reprint title. He wants actual new stories, and that did happen a little later on. Okay, so we're going to go into the second story. The story itself is a little bit nonsensical in that, as I mentioned, Wildfire was initially rejected by the Legion. They would not reject the guy with this guy's power set, but I think they were introducing this character because they weren't quite sure how the fan base would accept him or not. So they did a book, because the thing is that when the editors would create characters, sometimes they would create guys like, Matter Eater Lad, or kind of Chemical King or Bouncing Boy, and the fans would say these guys are lame, but because the editors created them, they were reluctant to get rid of them. Some of those guys do show up in this issue. So we see that there's a applicant to be a member of the Legion Superheroes, because Legion, they still accept resumes. So they accepted this guy's resume. They called him into the headquarters to see what this guy can do here. At the time, Montel is the leader. He's honestly not a particularly good leader here, because he kind of screws up twice in this issue. However, Montel is the leader, so he speaks for the rest of the Legionnaires, saying, "Listen, do you really know what you're signing up for? You really, really, really need to know what you're signing up for. That you have to be ready and instant for action, and that any time of the day. In addition, your life is going to be in constant danger." And what we call Erg 1, he answers back that he knows this. He's aware of the issues that would be, involved with being a member of the Legion of Superheroes, but he's ready for the task. And this story is called The One-Shot Hero. The story is by Cary Bates, and the art is by Dave Cockrum, who does a really good job here. So anyway, some of the other members are questioning him. Dave Cockrum did a really great job with Phantom Girl. However, this is sort of the one panel where the art's a little questionable, because she has this really big forehead here. This is like leader type forehead. And we see Chemical King here, and I think he was accidentally used, and I'll go into that a little later. We see Chemical King here. He literally looks like he stepped out of a GQ cover here. He is really good looking here. So anyway, both of them are questioning Ergo 1 about what type of power set and what he could bring to the table. Wildfire is telling them about his origin, and that basically he was an astro engineer named Drake Burroughs. He was just a regular guy. However, there was kind of like an O-ring problem with one of the spacecrafts here. So when that O-ring kind of cracked, suddenly the propulsion system of this rocket he was working on kind of split open. And it turns out that they were using antimatter energy. And this antimatter energy that was released, it engulfed Drake here. And Drake was sort of caught in this and he like binded to this energy. So here, on one hand, he's kind of sentient, but on the other, he's basically pure energy. And he's asking for help. Obviously, his engineer friends are going to help him. It turns out they keep him kind of a stasis tube. So he's kind of like in this tube similar to the origin of the Human Torch. And the thing is, because his body had been consumed by this antimatter energy, he's basically made of antimatter energy. Now, during this time, him and his engineer friends, they were able to construct this suit where Drake can move around, because Drake's body is just kind of a mass of like Kirby crackle. But within this container suit, he's able to sort of function as a person. And he's showing off some of the powers that he has. I don't think he's ever demonstrated these powers after this issue. So I think once he was accepted as a member of Wildfire, they kind of depowered him a little bit. He says that he has sight and hearing that can match Superboy's. He has the ability to assume any type of element he wants. And he makes reference to Chemical King. Even though the powers that he's displaying are really closer to Element Lad. And that's the one thing that kind of stands out in this issue, is that Chemical King is doing things that Element Lad does. And I think what happened is the creative team got the two mixed up. I'm thinking maybe Dave Cockrum accidentally used Chemical King when he was supposed to use Element Lad. So Wildfire, at this point, he can change himself into any chemical. He changes his body to pure sodium. He can also expand and shrink his energies. So he can become as large as Colossal Boy, and at the same time he can contract his energies and contract his bodysuit, where he's basically shrinking Violet. And then we see a really nicely drawn panel of Phantom Girl's face, where he can change his molecular structure to mimic her powers. Now he puts his hand basically into her head. I'm hoping he really practiced that power a lot, because if he's kind of off or he doesn't have full control of that power, he might end up with pieces of her brain in his fingers. However, that doesn't happen. Again, like, the art is just so... Dave Cockrum drew these beautiful faces, just like Kurt Schaffenberg. Dave Cockrum was a more dynamic version of Kurt Schaffenberg. And it turns out he also has the power of flight because of his energies. So he can do more things. However, Montel is kind of being an a-hole here, and he's the leader, and he's kind of setting the tone. And he's saying, listen, you can duplicate our powers, but do you have something original? I mean, Matter Eater Lad, that's an original power. Bouncing Boy, that's an original power. I mean, what are you showing me that's original? And Ergo 1 says that he does, and that he has a lot of powers. He hasn't fully developed them yet, because it's sort of like in the developmental stage. Montel, he's being just a hard ass here, saying, listen, we can't accept that. You have duplicate powers to other members, even though we have broken that rule like half a dozen times. Doesn't matter. I'm in charge here. I'm going to enforce that rule. And so Montel's enforcing the rule that every member must possess a unique superpower. And he's saying, listen, you can only imitate us. And so he's rejected for membership. However, before then, Ergo 1, he does make his case the last time, saying he does have one power that you guys don't have, and the others want to see it. Monel really wants to see it. The other guys, I think, they kind of just want to let this guy in. But, Montel's the leader. He's just being a Prussian hard ass here. However, Ergo 1, he doesn't want to display that power because he doesn't feel he can properly control it. So it's kind of like something he doesn't really want to commit to. So he accepts the fact that he's disqualified from membership. However, it turns out that Bouncing Boy, who I bet was a hard no, I bet like Matter Eater Lad and Bouncing Boy and Chemical King, whenever someone showed up with any type of powers that would show them up, I bet you these guys were like hard no's. So it turns out that they're getting a message from the Planetary Federation. It's an SOS. So, Bouncing Boy is telling the other members of the Legion that they have to kind of answer this call. Phantom Girl, who is really the one member who is in Ergo 1's corner, and she really feels bad, and she probably feels a little embarrassed about the way her teammates voted. She wishes Ergo 1, the best of luck. She says, "Listen, I voted for you. I think you would have been a fine member." But, that hard no from Matter Eater Lad and Bouncing Boy, it was just too difficult to overcome. Ergo 1 is he's just shaking his head, they're taking those lame-os, over him. Phantom Girl's kind of trying to explain the situation. Listen, Mont likes those guys around. He says it makes him feel more powerful. So, I'm sorry that these guys are so insecure, but I think you would have made a great member. So then the other members of the Legion, they answered this call from the Planetary Federation. And it turns out there's a problem on Mana 5. And that's a planet, and that's kind of an agricultural planet. So that's basically their food base. So planet Earth and the Federation, that's the planet that feeds them. Now, before I go back to the story, I'm going to take a look at an in-house ad. It looks like Plop was coming out at this time. Plop was DC's, answer to Mad, or their attempt to compete with Mad, because it was their humor magazine. They did get some Mad talent involved. Sergio Agonis was involved with it. I think he was their main artist. And I'm sure Joe Orlando, who was already at DC, he was involved with it. I never really found competition for Mad. There was really no competition for Mad. Although I'm sure there were always kids who were preferred crack to Mad. But then those are the kids you didn't really want to be friends with. And it looks like we have DC's subscription service. I think you get 15 issues for $3. How did they make money? I don't get that. Okay, so anyway, I guess the president of the Interplanetary Federation is asking for help because apparently there's this large machine that's destroying their crops. Sort of like the crystalline entity in Star Trek Next Generation, where this entity would kind of strip off the surface of these planets for food. It looks like this device is doing the same thing. So obviously they want to stop that because they want to keep their food supply going. And it's not only Earth's food supply, it's also other planets too. So anyway, Montel is saying, listen, we're going to take care of it. And Montel here, terrible leader. First of all, he rejected Ergo 1, who was Wildfire, saying he looked at all that huge power set. He must have been feeling a little insecure, didn't want to compete with this guy, and he wanted to stay in the comfort zone of having Bouncing Boy and Matter Eater Lad around. So immediately he rejected someone who could really help the Legion. Then he decides that he's going to send teams of 3 to handle this threat to their food supply. So basically, The first cruiser goes out, the first Legionnaire cruiser, which is basically, the Starship Enterprise here. And it has a Phantom Girl, Colossal Boy, and Chemical King. And basically, Montel's going to send waves of 3. So if these three can't handle it, he's going to send another 3 out. And if they can't handle it, another 3. So rather than sending the whole team, he's kind of doing it piecemeal here. And it really kind of bites him on the ass a little later on. However, the 3 Legionnaires, they go into action. It turns out they have a stowaway. And we find out later that stowaway is Erg-1. And he's going to use this as an opportunity to prove himself to the other Legionnaires. So the first one who goes on the attack is Chemical King. And he uses lethal burst of radioactive cobalt. And he finds that it doesn't dent this particular device. Now again, I think they intended to use Element Lad, because this is stuff that Element Lad does. This is not stuff Chemical King does. And my guess is that either there was a mistake, or they realized they really haven't used Chemical King much. And this was sort of an opportunity to use them. So I guess they might have swapped them, and they didn't really fully know the power set. So there's kind of a mistake of the creative team. Now his attack doesn't work. So Phantom Girl is going to use her attack, and she's going to go into the device itself. And she phases through the device. However, it turns out that this device, this large giant robot, does have a self-defense mechanism against Phantom Girl, and it applies an electrical shock to her, and this jolt is quite powerful. So it kind of takes her out of the action here. By the way, Phantom Girl with this hair, with the twin ponytails and all the cleavage, oh man, she looks great. Okay, the next one is Colossus Boy. He uses a more direct approach. He just increases his size, and he sees what he can do against this large device. However, he's not effective at all, and he's immediately knocked unconscious. However, Colossus Boy lands in the path of this destructive device, and he's about to be basically diced and chopped up here. We have 2 members of the Legion, Chemical King and Phantom Girl, who can't help him. So, Montel and his great leadership here is basically going to get one of his members killed here. And it turns out that the danger is even greater, because Colossus Boy is shrinking. So not only is he in danger of being engulfed by this machine, he's not even at a size where he can properly defend himself. The other 2 members don't know what the hell to do. They don't have a power set that would properly handle this creature, or actually this large device. So they just basically have to watch their friend being killed here. Thanks, Montel. However, they hear a loud boom. It turns out to be Ergo-1. He immediately heads to the device, and he unleashes like a destructive force from his head shield. He unleashes a destructive force from his visor. It actually destroys the robot here. And then with the robot destroyed, they know it's unmanned, or they're assuming it's unmanned. Chemical King uses a large amount of acid to kind of burn down the rest of the parts here. Phantom Girl, she swoops in, and she's able to carry Colossus Boy here out of the danger area. All 3 of the members of the Legion, they're both alive. They want to check on Erg-1, because they know he's the one who saved them. Again, some beautifully drawn panels here. And it turns out that it looks like Erg-1 kind of sacrificed his life for them. So it looks like he never became a member of the Legion, but he fought like one, and he had the honor of one, and he will be remembered by the rest of the team. Obviously, he came back because obviously reader reaction was very positive to this character. And that's it. They're telling you that they're telling us the next issue of Superboy will be out around April 19th. And yeah, that's it. So that's my review of Superboy issue 195, and I hope to have more up soon. Bye.